Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started with the afternoon component of our program. How did everyone enjoy our morning keynote and panel discussions? I hope everyone ate abundantly. I saw some leftover food, so it's always a concern when you have so much people that we have enough food for everyone. So I think we fed everyone. So did everyone eat? Okay. You guys didn't sound too excited, so let me ask it again. Usually food gets a standing ovation, so let me ask again. Did you all eat? Okay. All right, great, thank you. Just making sure. As you are welcome guests at MedgarEversCollege, you want to make sure, as I indicated this morning, that we not only feed you with food, but also feed your appetite for knowledge. So our next keynote speaker, and again, he and I were talking on the way here, and I told him I don't know if he likes this categorization, but I liken him to, and I've been comparing him or saying he's the next thing coming. He is the next Ta-Nehisi Coates of our time, in that the brother is impactful, he's powerful, he's a young brother, very articulate, and his book speaks volumes. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our afternoon keynote speaker, who you'll have with us for about 45 minutes or so, and then he'll entertain question and answers. So let me just go right ahead. So Michael Denzel Smith is a contributing writer to The Nation, a blogger to thenation.com, and a Alfred Nobler Fellow at the Nation Institute. He's the author of The Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching, published in 2016 by The Nation Books. He is also a freelance writer and social commentator. His work on race, politics, social justice, pop culture, hip-hop, mental health, feminism, black male identity has appeared in various publications, including The Guardian, Ebony, The Griot, The Root, The Huffington Post, and Good Magazine. Please join me in welcoming our afternoon keynote, Michael Denzel Smith.
Good afternoon. I don't like that comparison because he sold way more books than I have, so. Thank you all for inviting me to this, Dr. Wright. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I come today with a bit of a heavy heart in that earlier this week, I learned that my most important professor and mentor, Dr. Lauren Foster, who taught me freshman English and African literature and American literature and so many things about life, passed away earlier this week. And it's the first black male teacher that I had in the classroom. Took till college for that to happen. And the impact that he had on me as a person, as a writer, is simply immeasurable. And you'll excuse me if I get a little emotional. And with that, I'd like to start by reading from my book and giving you a sense of some of my relationship with Dr. Foster. This comes from the first chapter of my book, and it will set the tone for what we're going to discuss after. I was 10 minutes late the first day of my English 101 class. In every orientation at Hampton, they stressed this saying: to be early is to be on time is to be late, and to be late is unacceptable. It's not something that I abide by, but. I wish I could say I was making some grand rebellious statement to institutional conformity, but since being born at 11:20 p.m., after 3 earlier trips to the hospital, I've generally been late to everything. And English 101 at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday was no different. I strolled into class around 6:15 with my uniform on, headphones around my ears, backpack secure over my shoulders, and took the first available seat right next to the door, as if all was normal. Professor Foster stopped mid-sentence when I walked in, his eyes following me, his grin widening with every second, every step I took. And got the nerve to have a Malcolm X t-shirt on at that, he finally said, breaking into half genuine, half performative laughter. Professor Foster, who at the time was still finishing up his dissertation and would quickly reply with the date of his graduation to correct anyone who called him Dr. Foster, was a 6-foot-tall, bald black man from Chicago who often ate applesauce on wheat bread as a post-class dinner. I know this because I spent many days in his office after class, not always by choice. In the beginning, to be honest, never by choice. But Professor Foster was an educator, rigorous and engaged. And he saw me. He clocked me from the moment I opened the door. After noting my Malcolm X t-shirt, Professor Foster skipped ahead in his classroom introduction to show us the place in the syllabus where it talked about tardiness. If you're more than 10 minutes late, don't even bother coming. The door will be locked, he told us. The first day was an exception, but there would be no more. I didn't have to go to his office that day, but I did have to stay after class and listen to Professor Foster sardonically refer to me as Mr. Smith while asking why I was late, to which I didn't have a good answer, and telling me how much fun he was going to have with me that semester. I hadn't really been challenged, he told me, but that was going to change. Professor Foster's approach to teaching English 101 was unorthodox. Whenever someone says something in education is unorthodox, it conjures images of a movie trailer about a nice white lady who goes to the inner city and teaches black youth that rap and poetry are really the same thing. But the norm is so staid that unorthodox as a descriptor fits. It was unorthodox for us to engage with texts created by black authors. It was unorthodox for us to engage those texts not just for form, style, and prose, but also content. His estimation, never been truly challenged. Mr. Smith, he said through that goofy grin, interrupting the excitement. Your thoughts? My moment arrived and the pressure was on. I slouched down a bit in my seat, backpack still on and headphones around my neck, because I was trying desperately to make that my look. Waited a couple beats and said, I think selling drugs should be legal. Okay, why? Professor Foster didn't care that I retreated into my shyness. He was going to make me translate the thoughts that bounced around in my head. I still didn't have the wording quite right, but I was on the spot and he wasn't going to let up, so I let it out. We sell stuff that's harmful to people all the time. Bleach can kill you, fast food can kill you, so why not let people sell drugs? It's the most American form of business aside from prostitution. I thought that shit was the most clever thing ever uttered. Professor Foster seemed to be the only one even slightly amused or impressed by my observation. My analogy was imperfect, and the quip about prostitution probably distracted a few prudes from my overall point, but my intent stands up. There's a certain kind of moralizing around the drug business that doesn't exist elsewhere, and the criminalizing of certain products and services that are integral parts of American identity, whether we admit it or not, requires an advanced degree in hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance. The advantage of a decade worth of hindsight allows me to better articulate my idea. And maybe if I had worded it that way at the time, my classmates would have responded differently. As it was, no one followed me to the revolution. But Professor Foster did continue to take an interest in me. He made me stay after class for a few moments that day just to say, you forgot war. He got it, and that made me feel better, though I still felt like I missed an opportunity to gain my classmates' understanding and/or adoration. He kept me after class again not too long after that, this time with the intention of giving me an assignment, an extra assignment, something not in the syllabus, an assignment that wouldn't be graded but that he expected me to complete nonetheless. These were the perks of having someone take an interest in your education and development. He gave me a book, one he'd clearly read a number of times given the tattered pages, highlighted passages, and copious notes written in the margins. He wanted me to read it and be prepared to discuss it with him the next week. I don't remember the name of this book. I remember the title had something to do with politics and power, but not much else. I don't remember because I didn't read this book. I started to read it, but halfway through the first chapter, I found the heady academic jargon too much of a chore to wade through for required, non-required reading. And while it dealt with race to some extent, it wasn't the kind of say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud literature that got me excited in those days. But Professor Foster was expecting me to read it, so I skimmed a few other chapters and decided I could fake my way through at least 10 minutes of conversation. So what did you think? It was interesting. Interesting means you didn't read it. Professor Foster saw me. He always saw me, and I was always left wondering how. No, I did. It was interesting. I had never thought about things that way before. There's this stuff about how race affects politics in a way white people don't have to think about. It was interesting. Professor Foster took his index finger and jabbed it into my shoulder, and he said, "And what about for you, as a man?" Here was the challenge. Yeah, that too. I'd never really considered it that way. He had mercy on me and let me go, mostly because he had papers to read for our first of the semester, but he knew I hadn't read that book and he wasn't going to let me forget. I had deliberately skimmed over this stuff about gender and power because I was not at all interested. Then Professor Foster jabbed me in the shoulder. I needed to take an honest accounting of who I had been reading and listening to, who was shaping my thinking. Malcolm X, Aaron Magruder, Tupac, W.E. Du Bois, Mos Def, The Roots, Dead Prez, Public Enemy, Frederick Douglass, Huey Newton. Or in other words, man, 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 men, 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 man, man. And it had never once occurred to me that that might be a problem. I would have needed to be conscious of it in order to consider that possibility. To my newly forming black radical mind, women, more specifically black women, had a way of existing without being present. It's a natural result of consuming history and culture through the fables of masculine triumph. The centuries-long battle against American racism had been handed to me inside the framework of black male defiance. Douglass's bravery, Du Bois's genius, Malcolm's eloquence, Tupac's rage. The heroic women existed largely in service to enduring racist oppression, largely in service of ending racist oppression of the men, Ida B. Wells' research on lynching, or as a catalyst for a man's descendants to greatness, Rosa Parks resting her weary bones so Martin Luther King could end segregation. And having been raised in the 1990s where the main concern of racial discourse was the endangered black man, I had no reason to question the narrative. The centrality of the black male experience in the discourse of racist oppression has been passed down from generation to generation through our politics and our culture. And the sad part of this story is that I likely would have never confronted that history if it weren't for a bald black man from Chicago jabbing his finger into my shoulder. And so I read that, I haven't actually read that ever to an audience. It's kind of funny. And I say, thank you to the spirit of Dr. Foster for taking an interest in me and guiding me through those 4 years at Hampton University, but also for making me a critical thinker. He did not let me rest on my laurels. He decided that for all of the talent I possessed, what I hadn't yet grasped was that talent is meaningless without the effort, the work put behind it, and he was not going to allow me to be lazy. He wasn't going to allow me to be lazy in that sense, and he wasn't going to allow me to be a lazy thinker. And so with that, coming to this idea that we're discussing today around the image of Black and Latino men, boys, is this quote from Toni Morrison's new book, The Origin of Others, I'd like for us to consider a little bit. It says, "An image can determine not only what we know and feel, but also what we believe is worth knowing about what we feel." And I'm turning that quote over a little bit, and I think it's a correct observation, right? I think the images that we consume determine what we think is important, ask us to have questions around how that image was produced, what that image is trying to accomplish. Then the question for me, though, becomes, what do we want to know? What do we want to know from these images? What is it that our unpacking of them and our questioning of them is supposed to produce? And I think so often the discourse, particularly when it comes to men of color, black men, Latino men, in terms of imagery, we're preoccupied with the notion of positive versus negative imagery, right? And what we're concerned about is a proliferation of what we refer to as negative imagery, that what people are seeing is not only false, but somehow destructive. But I'm curious. I've less answers than I do questions here. I'm curious about what these designations actually mean to us. And I'm curious about how we define them, how we came to understanding what constitutes a positive image versus what constitutes a negative image. My question is, when we say negative image, are we referring to racist imagery? Is that what we mean? And if that's what we mean, why not then say that? Why are we eliding the issue of what? Because negative to me simply means that negative is too nebulous. It's too subjective, right? What is negative to you may not be negative to me. Like if we're talking about racist, though, this is a history that we can look back to and see the ways in which these images are constructed, the uses of those images in their time, and what effects they may have had. So if we're asking, if what we're designating negative is then racist, what are we seeking to gain by unpacking that racist image? What's the ask of the destruction of that racist image? Is the ask for systems of power or people in power to view us differently? Are we asking to destroy these racist images on the idea that it will eliminate biases? And I'm curious about that because I don't think that that's the way it works. Right? In his book, Stamped from the Beginning, Dr. Ibram Kendi unpacks the entire history of racist ideas, right? And how, indeed, every racist trope that you've ever come across has been constructed. And there's no evidence to show in his history, in his examination of this, that what happens is the consumption of racist ideas turns into racist policy, right? It's the other way around. It is the need of a class of people who are invested in power and maintenance of that power, who then go about the intellectual work of producing racist ideas to justify their oppression. Right? So my question then is, if we're asking for the destruction of the racist image, right? If we're asking that black men not be depicted a certain way because of the impact that it may have on other people viewing us, one, what is the investment in that gaze? We're talking about the white gaze here. What's the investment in the white gaze? What does it mean for us in practical and or imaginative terms? What does it mean to be so invested in the way that white people see us? But also, if it's not going to produce the desired effect, what is our investment in racist imagery? Why do we see it as necessarily evil, right? It's not to say that it's not. It's obviously, but what are we so worried about if the only thing that's going to happen is by virtue of the destruction of certain racist images now, there will be the production of more racist images after, in order to continue to justify the systems that are in place? Are we not doing this backwards? Are we so wrapped up in the idea that we can change the media representation of ourselves and then the systems will fall after, which has never proven to be true. Where should we be devoting our energy then? And so I just asked that as a question for us to ponder, right? And then on the flip side of this is the so-called positive image, right? We're invested in the creation of positive images. Are we, one, I mean, just it's what constitutes a positive image? And we'll come back to that a little later. But again, to what end are we invested in these things? Is it the idea, again, that by virtue of us presenting in a certain way, the rationale for racist oppression goes away and therefore racist oppression goes away? That's still, again, just never how it's worked, right? This is what bothers me so much about like certain memes that I'll see on the internet, and they'll juxtapose a picture of black men in suits in the 1960s, and then on the bottom it'll be present day black men and dressed in the style of the time, and it's one that I've seen is like when they took us seriously and now they don't. And my question is, they took us seriously? At any point in our history, they took us seriously? It's this investment in sort of like the projection of a quote unquote positive image as a means of combating racism, as if to say that racism rests on a rationale. It is completely irrational. It only does the work of maintenance for itself, right? The trope of both the lazy and the hardworking black slave came out of slavery. It doesn't care which one it needs. It needs both of them. It needs to both dehumanize in one respect in order to say that, you know, at that time to say, oh, they are so lazy, they need us for training them to help them become better. And also to dehumanize and say that they are naturally built for work, therefore, why wouldn't we use them, right? Like, it does not have any central ideology that makes sense. It is contradictory by nature, because power itself is contradictory. Power needs only the justification that allows it to remain in power. And with that, I ask, if the positive image is not meant to, if it does not have the ability to defeat that system, what is our investment in it? Is it simply, is it more focused on our own self-esteem and self-identity and self-perception? And I'm sympathetic to that, the idea that one would want to find their place and be able to see images that they can relate to and feel connected to, that are not so tied to things that are destructive and things that are harmful to us. But are we not then producing superficial positive images in the name of positivity, right? I think that, I mean, we can look at sort of examples of what we've already done, right? In the 80s, the Cosby Show was this boon. Everyone loved the Cosby Show because of the depiction of a black family, because of what we saw on the screen and the ways in which we thought that was having an effect on white America, perceiving that we are not all uneducated, we're not all poor, all these other things. And the careful construction of this black middle class family that was constructed by Bill Cosby. Yeah, he was very invested in that image. Now, what was he actually doing? What was he actually doing with his time? So my question about the production of positive imagery is, does it bear out any real life consequence in terms of our self-perception? Because if there can be that big of a disconnect between the man creating those images and the image itself, I'm curious about what net value does the positive image itself have? Not to say that there's none. I'm just curious about what net value it has. And in being so invested in the positive image, are we not being honest? Are we refusing honesty about who we are and the messiness and complications of our own humanity, right? And I think about this, again, just in terms of a construction of a certain sense of masculinity, right? And I think specific to what we're discussing here, the idea that in order to combat racist images, negative images, what we need to do is be constructing positive images of black men, things that do not hew to the script that we've been fed around the black man as violent, as uneducated, as all of these other things. But then that draws up these other questions, because also in the 80s, there was a big discussion around Alice Walker's The Color Purple, right? And a backlash from black men who, and this is not the first time, right? But a backlash from black men who were saying that Alice Walker was trafficking in precisely that same racist imagery that black men were trying to combat. But what Alice Walker was doing in telling this story of this poor, queer black woman and the violence that she faced was articulating black women's experience directly as it related to black men. And so if we're so invested in the positive image and think that the work of every cultural worker should be such that they only produce positive images, does that then mean we have no room for authentic and honest depictions of our messy humanity and the things in which black men may be complicit in? Because Alice Walker was articulating the oppression felt by black women inside the home, right? And if we're talking about that very real sense of violence visited upon black women, but we're only concerned then about whether or not it's a positive representation of black men, how do we get at the roots of that violence? Do we care about that violence? And so all that I'm saying here, and all the questions that I'm raising are just about how do we deconstruct the notions that we've come to understand as important in terms of imagery, in this dichotomy of positive versus negative, so that we're less married to that idea and more interested in honest representation and honest images, no matter what that looks like. And honest, absent the white gaze, honest, absent of a concern about what white folks are going to think about us. Because they're going to think what they're going to think. I'm concerned more about how we go about the work of producing images that get us to wrestle with the ways in which we can foster a greater respect and love and community-oriented definition of what masculinity looks like, so that the things that are treacherous about it get us to we are unpacking and undoing those things in the name of liberation work. So thank you. I guess now I'll be taking some questions if you have them. And if you don't, I can also just leave. Yes.
I just want to say congratulations on your book.
Thank
I
you.
have it right here. And also want to take a picture after.
Yeah, of course.
My question to you, and I almost broke down a little bit, was how do you take fully advantage of every special goal that you carry as a leader in your Black community, and how you're able to also reach out to those that are able to achieve that goal, for not being afraid of dealing with discrimination or, of course, segregation, I would say. And I'm also a writer myself.
No, I think what it comes down to is a level of acceptance that that self-doubt is never going to leave you. I mean, I'm still challenged by the blank page, right? I still sit down to it and I say, no one cares what I have to say, and I'm not the right person to say it. And that's training. That's by design. Those of us who are not straight white men are not supposed to believe that we have anything of value to say. That's been beat into us, sometimes literally. And overcoming that is, one, I'm a professional writer, so my bills are connected to it. But the other thing is that I feel a sense of duty. I feel a sense of responsibility to use whatever talents I may possess in the work of, what do I want to say here? I think that the bigger thing for me is always, what are we all doing to get free? And how do we use whatever talents we are possessed with to aid in that? And I believe everyone must do what it is that they do. I am a writer. That is what I do. If you are a teacher, if you are a social worker, if you are a football player, if whatever it is that you do, are you doing that with the guiding principle that I am doing this because, in a way that reflects the principles of getting free? And that's a complicated thing, right? I don't want to diminish that and make it seem as if that's like a simple thing to come to, but are you using those talents in a way? Are you using the platform afforded to you? I mean, just think about something like Colin Kaepernick, right? He decided at some point that he wanted to use the platform afforded to him to draw attention to an issue that he found important to his people. And he risked everything, and we see that he lost his job. Do the benefits outweigh the risk for you? Is what you believe in so steadfast in your heart that you can't not do it? Those are the questions that I simply have to confront every time that I sit down and the goal is to produce work that maybe it doesn't change things immediately, but someone is inspired by this. Someone picks it up later on, and these ideas transform, and these ideas are questioned, and we work on that project together.
Thank you. Before you get off, I also have a special illustration that I drew for you to take home.
Oh, thank you.
For my
Thank you.
signature.
Thank you.
So we're going to try to do questions on each side. So
There you go.
Hi, so I don't have a question. Someone just wanted to meet you, so I'm speaking on behalf of him. He's visually impaired, so
Okay.
he wanted to walk up and meet you.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Just a sec. Yes.
Hi, Mr. Smith. Jalil Thomas, Baruch College. I just wanted to know if you can give about 2 or 3 takeaways on the subject matter that you were speaking on, like the reconstruction of the images or black images per se. Something that we can go back to our designated campuses and say, hey guys, in our BSUs or something, this is what we need to do to reconstruct like a black image, more of a positive image for our communities.
You missed the talk, brother?
No. So,
I think we just had a whole conversation about
you did.
positive
Right,
versus
but like-
negative,
right,
and the superficiality of positivity.
Right. No. So you said a lot, right? You said a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm speaking like general takeaways that everybody can kind of take back and say, hey, these are 2 or 3 points
Okay.
that like.
So. Yes. So fortuitous, I get to channel Dr. Foster's spirit right now. There aren't 2 or 3 takeaways. Right. And the fact that you still asked about positive imagery means you weren't catching what I was saying, and it's okay. What I'm saying is that the investment in positive imagery, such that we focus on the image, has been superficial, right? In that there's been such a disconnect in the ways in which we want to construct that image versus the ways we actually live our lives, right? The investment needs to be not in whether or not you make a movie that makes black men look good, or you make artwork, or you write things that make black men look good, that make them look educated, make them all the things that we know we already are. My thing is, are we being honest about who we are? Are we being honest about the systems that we are invested in? Are we being honest that the construction of that image does not combat the white gaze, that it does not end racism, right? That's what I want you to take away. I want you to take away a critical lens on the dichotomy that I believe is a false one. I think that the positive versus the negative imagery only gets us into a very, very limited and superficial conversation about whether or not we can convince people that we are not who they say we are. Can we convince ourselves that we are who we are?
Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
So my name is Shadiq Williams, Brooklyn College alum, class of 2017. So thank you. So first and foremost, I really wanted to thank you because you were able to put a lot of things in words. I knew I kind of had floating around in my head, but I couldn't really put into a thing. I had a conversation with a friend who was having this whatever conversation about how people try to cancel certain shows, about the way black people are depicted, and he kind of made a similar point to you as, well, we all know somebody that looks like those people on these shows. So are we creating an honest depiction, so on and so forth? And something that somebody said to me that's I kind of keep with me is like being my own standard bearer, right? Even it's like waking up and thinking, how do I get dressed for something like this? Do I wear a tie? Do I wear shoes? Or it's like, you know what? Dress how I want, because at the end of the day, there is no one way that a young, black, articulate, whatever it is you want to put, no man can look. So I wanted to ask you, like, other than what you already shared, what was one or two other like aha moments that kind of struck you as like, you know what, certain things that we think matter don't really matter? Or like, how did you kind of come further into the way that you think now?
I thank you for that. I don't know that there's any aha moments, right? Learning is a process. But what I will say is that, in the last few years, we've all been bombarded with these images and stories around young black men killed by police and vigilantes. And, the list, we can all rattle off the names and everything. But around that conversation, there's always a question about what could he have done, right? Like, if Trayvon wasn't wearing a hoodie, right? If Jordan Davis had turned the music down, right? And it is all predicated on this idea that what provokes the response, that what provokes the racist response is black behavior, right? And that's completely false. I mean, we see it all the time, that has nothing to do with the way in which this violence is inflicted upon us. What it has to do with is structures of violence meant for the maintenance of white supremacy, right? You see that in conversations about rape and sexual assault. What are we always asking? What did she do? How did she lead him on? What was she wearing? These are always questions that we ask about the behavior of the oppressed, right? And I think that we're understandably wanting to look for practical solutions. We all want to feel like we are in control of our own destinies and that there's things that we can do that will defeat those systems. But as we keep looking at that and we keep looking at the pattern unfold over and over and over again, what it says to me is that there is no perfect image that one can construct and then be free of any of these systems, right? We experienced 8 years of the first black president of the United States, right? My critiques of Obama aside for right now, he did every single thing that they say we're supposed to do to earn respect. He went to all the right colleges. He married a woman. They had kids. He's the most articulate president that we've had, right? He tried to sell Republicans their own health care plan, right? Like, he gave it to them. And what happened to him? What happened to the most respectable black man that this country has ever produced, right? That image did not matter. The image that he constructed did not matter. He still faced a racist backlash. So I think, part of it is shaped by that. It's just an understanding that this is not going to save us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a Baruch alum and BMCC economics professor. And I want to first thank you for kind of delving into the whole, if I'm summarizing incorrectly, the respectability kind of politics around imagery. because I do feel like there is this onus placed, especially upon people of color, to kind of break out of the nuanced humanity to just be this either perfect image or this stereotype. And if you end up in one column, it's very hard for someone to take seriously that you can still be that person and become an academic or X and Y. So I appreciate that. I do want to ask you, does your take on how much that image matters change if we consider perhaps that the way that racism functioned in the past may not necessarily be the way it's functioning now? And that's to say that it may be perhaps more automated through the implicit biases functions that we were learning about, and that automation may mean that there is some value in having positive images of people of color in the national narrative. And if I could take 1 second, just speak about this moment that I had in one of my classrooms. I have an international student who was not aware that braids were at all part of the black culture. And we were having a discussion about how sometimes narratives that do enter into the national conversation, shows like The Wire, they come automatically associated with black people. But the positive, or maybe not even the positive, but the things that don't necessarily have these negative connotations don't come with that attachment, like, oh yeah, black people also came up with this as well. So is there perhaps value in defeating that automation or that automated process of associating blacks negatives by including some positive images, even if they may be moderately manufactured?
Thank you for that. This is where I'm going to butt up against your entire program. I don't buy into implicit bias as a huge factor, right? I think certainly, sure. I think like the imagery, like we sort of make associations, blah blah blah. I think that lets the system off the hook, right? I think that means that it's still a personal thing and is not programmatic and it is not systemic. It is not what implicit bias then means is that by virtue of a judge looking at a black or Latino man in an instance of sentencing them, they make a harsher sentence, right? And that happens, sure. But what that then doesn't get us to talk about is the ways in which behaviors associated with blackness become criminalized because a system that is dependent upon our labor needs to constantly feed that, right? It is not accidental that the prison system emerges post-Reconstruction, right? It is because the disappearance of that free labor force means that racism now needs to find a new way to niggerize us, right? And it did it through so many different means, but that's one of them, right? It is a way in which it said, we need our free labor back, so we'll make rolling dice in the street illegal, right? We'll make being poor illegal, right? If you can't produce paperwork saying that you have a job, we will arrest you and we will lock you in a chain gang and you'll work on those same plantations that you just came from, right? Like, that is not about an implicit bias. And then I think we're like thinking that, oh, it's changed now, that somehow it's just a function of people having imbibed these images and they still associate, and because they see it on the 5 o'clock news, that, oh, all the criminals are black men, then all the criminals must be black men. No, they believe all the criminals are black men because that's how you maintain a system of white supremacy, right? Like that, I think the implicit bias narrative lets people not be invested in that system, right? Like we say that they don't have any interest now. Like they're just blind to their own understanding of no. They know. They want it this way. They want it to be this way. So with that, no, I don't think that implicit bias is a strong enough explanation for the racism that we see today. I think that, and in order to defeat those systems, I think we can't let people off the hook by saying it's simply, oh, it's not your fault.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr.
Hey.
Smith. My name is Crystal Gulisano. I am from BMCC, and I'm representing UMLA from BMCC. A lot of these gentlemen, they had very great questions for you, so they actually answered a lot of the things that I was curious about, but I do still want to pick your brain. So I'm just curious. I know you started off with the professor in the class, and I thought that was really interesting, just your perspective and how you broke it down and how you thought, you said how he viewed you and how you viewed him, and that kind of changed everything. I'm just wondering, was that the big, what's the word I'm trying to say? Was that like the big highlight that kind of drove you in this direction? Or was there other things that happened to you after that that kind of made this something that you really wanted to focus on?
Before you answer, we have 4 minutes, so I'm going to rapid fire. So just take
Okay.
all the questions and then try to...
I'm gonna take all the questions and try to assess so.
Hi, I'm Delmar from the John J. Sieg Department. Thank you for articulating a lot of things that I felt and wasn't exactly sure how to say. But 2 questions. One, what about all the images that we consume of just black folks being killed? And how are we supposed to reconcile the positive impact and the negative impact that has? And we're in this space, either as students or staff working with men of color. What should we be doing to help them understand their privilege, but also the oppression that they have?
All right. And I'm going to take that question.
Hello, I'm Terry White from BMCC Urban Male Leadership Academy. And my question, I had to write it down. Considering the current political climate, the long-term social, economic, and financial biases, and considering that the powers that be, by and large, make policies which more often than not harm our communities, can we really afford to ignore the white gaze? And when they are the ones that are actually shaping the policies that are harming us.
Okay, gotcha. Right here.
Hi, my name is Jerome. I am at BMCC and I'm representing UMLA as well. I have a question in regards to the image that we see of ourselves, how we see ourselves, and representing ourselves as people of color. How do we keep ourselves down simply because how white people, how they, whoever they are, see us, that's how they're going to see us. But how can we empower ourselves to see ourselves in this audience, perhaps in a better light? Because we all have our biases, and those biases can hurt.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
All right, so I'll try to make this quick. Understanding what you had to say earlier, but to think about the effects of dehumanization, within the 300 centuries, or 3 centuries that passed. I want to know, what do you think that black people could do? Because it seems like, I heard what you said, but it seems like we have a lot of educated black people, people who are, who study ethnic backgrounds and understand what's going on with the world and how we were dehumanized and how we had to gain our be considered humans in this world that we live in, even though we are human beings with everything that tells other people that we're human beings because we could breathe and eat and everything like that.
Yeah.
But my question is, what do you think we can necessarily do to gain power back without seeming like we're not trying to associate with white people or try to kind of be whitewashed or whenever we're in a public space, maintain a certain image, but not necessarily trying to impress them, but or white people. I don't mean to sound.
I think
I'm. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm gonna just grab the other question.
How you doing? I'm Jason from BCC, the Male Empowerment Network, and my question was, as an African American male in America, how do we survive? In the term of, we've kind of ignored the white gaze in the past. One example in my eyes would be Tulsa. where we had our own Wall Street, Black Wall Street,
Yeah.
and we were burnt out. And we have our own shops. We have Harlem, which is being taken over now. We have Brooklyn. We have the Bronx. So how do we survive? How do we keep?
Gotcha.
How do we ignore the white gaze and survive? Because we also have African burial ground, which was found under a building. So obviously, we're not. You know, I'm sure enough.
No, I'm gonna try to get everybody's question answered now.
But basically, how do we
No,
survive?
I got you. So the question about consumption of the images of Black death. Everyone has to make their own decisions about that. I have personally decided to not watch any more lynchings. And I use that language deliberately because that is the function that it has, right? It is the same as when they hung us from trees. What the message is fear. It is to instill fear so that you good Negroes don't step out of line, don't step out of the place that you know you're supposed to be. And so, I mean, I go back and forth about what the effects and what is gained from the proliferation of those images. I don't believe that they're changing any hearts and minds to witness Black people dying. I think that everyone comes to it with their own scripts already. And so when white audiences are watching these Black deaths, they're watching what they don't believe to be human shot down and killed anyway. And so, but I also am sympathetic to the idea that it is somehow necessary to at least have people see this happen. I'm worried about who the producers are and what they seek to gain from it. So I mean, that's something I'm still working through, but I personally have decided to not watch those things. In terms of unpacking privilege, it's so much of the book is about specifically Black men addressing the idea that they can possess privilege. And I think, there are simple exercises that you can address with people who are of a marginalized and oppressed class to say, you do indeed experience some kind of privilege based on other identity markers. And particularly unpacking that one that rests on gender. It's, something as simple as like, have you ever considered which bathroom you're supposed to walk into? And you haven't, that's a privilege for you, right? And that goes to a certain type of cisgender privilege that we can unpack. But, things that are common in terms of talking to men, saying, what precautions do you take when you want to go to a party, right? If you ask women that question, it's about like, okay, do I have my keys and my mace and my rape whistle, and have I traveled with a group of friends? Like, are we all like that? That's just a level of emotional labor that women go through that most men don't think about, right? So it's pointing out those little everyday things that get men to start thinking about the larger aspects of their privilege, right? In terms of, and I think the two questions are sort of related in terms of the white gaze and a sense of of fostering power, in that, yes, this is where we are, right? So it is not to say that a rejection of the white gaze means non-engagement with white power, right? White power exists, and therefore we must engage and confront it. When I speak of the white gaze, I think what I'm referencing and trying to get at is the determination of white people's perceptions of us, and influencing and infecting the ways in which we view ourselves, right? And therefore saying, you know, if the white gaze determines who is and is not acceptable, we need to question that. We need to be engaged in the idea that when white people find someone very acceptable, there's maybe a problem, you know? That I think it is not disengagement, it is saying critical thinking, and then therefore in the world we are trying to build, how do we build selves that are not connected to a sense of diminishment that comes from the white gaze. And I think in that, we're talking about building power, and building power simply means being organized as a people who are engaged in critical dialogue and democratic processes with one another to say, how are we going to what are we looking at in terms of the system and its effects, right? And what's the corrective measure? And that only comes from the collective, and that only comes absent of the white gaze, in that we don't want what has determined our course throughout this history to then infect the way that we understand the future. And so it is a rejection of that, in the sense that we don't want to take it into our utopia, right? Like, we need some utopian thinking in terms of, we need to know what we want. We need to know what it is what is the next world that we're building. And that sense of power comes from there for me. In terms of us building our own images because of a sense of self, right? Like, not because we want to impress white people, it's just for us. I think we do that already. Like, we do that for ourselves. We do that in our art. We do that in our music. We do that in our self-expression, in our dance, in our fashion. Like, we are doing that already. Like, that, it just exists. I think it's a matter of appreciating the beauty for what it is. How do we survive? We're here. We're here. It's daunting, and it always seems like we're on the verge of destruction, but we're still here. They can't get rid of us. And you know, you read through the history and you understand that, like, the threat of white supremacy is always present, but we have always fought back, and we have always, we have. Maybe not all of us, but we have survived. We are still here. We're Antoine Fishering it. We're still here. We're still standing. We're still strong. And I think I got all of them except yours. And there were other things. And plug, you can read the book to find out what other things there were. But yes, my relationship with Dr. Foster was incredibly meaningful. He's the one who knocked the youthful arrogance out of me and made room for some grown man arrogance. But he exposed just how much I didn't know and how foolish I was to think I knew it all. And just in terms of showing me what a good human looked like, in caring for me. I mean, when he passed and, the memories start flooding back, I had trouble graduating in the 4 years, and in part due to severe depression. And I came back the next semester after I was supposed to graduate, and Dr. Foster was one of the first people that I went to go see. And I told him what was going on. And I'm not a religious person per se, but Dr. Foster was deeply invested in his Christian faith. And he just looked at me, he listened to me, and then he grabbed his Bible. He flipped through, found 2 verses that he really liked, and he gave them to me. And that was, and every single time I had a panic attack going forward, I read those that Dr. Foster gave to me. And it's just that it wasn't just that he cared about me as a student, right, as someone engaged in an intellectual journey. He cared deeply about me as a person, and ensuring that I was whole and I was healthy. And he would talk to me about my relationship with my father. He'd talk to me about everything that you can imagine two human beings talking about. And I so appreciated that, and quite literally could not be the person that I am today, however small and insignificant that may be. I have him to thank for that. So, yeah. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere yet, brother. Don't go anywhere yet. Don't go anywhere.
So please don't go anywhere yet. Before we go ahead and release you all to your next round of panels, I definitely want to thank Michael Denzel Smith for being his true, organic self and really just laying it all out there. I think in our own conversations, he made this abundantly clear that we all don't have to believe in the same thing. We all just want to get to a particular vision, a particular goal, but how we get there is determinant of our own, not as a collective or an amalgamation of a way to get there. So thank you for bringing us through a different path of how we get to where we are, how we survive, and how we perceive structural and institutional racism of a context of our American society, and how we as people of color get past it. Whether the images be negative or positive, do not think of it as a dichotomous one was the major thing that I garnered from your talk. So thank you for really stressing that and bringing that to light. So on behalf of CUNY BMI, we want to give you this plaque as a recognition for your time here with us and say thank you for your afternoon keynote. So again, here's the breakdown for your panels. We're going to change one of the panels because from my understanding, one of the rooms were really warm, so we don't want you all to go in there and pass out, so we're going to switch up one of the rooms. So it starts with me. We'll be here in this room. The policy panel, Speak Up, Speak Out, would have been in the Mary Pinkett room, but we're going to have it here in this building in the President's Conference Room instead. So if you were planning on going to the policy panel, Speak Up, Speak Out, we're going to move that from Mary Pinkett to the President's Conference Room, which is here in this building, and that is room 1008. The next two panels will remain in the same rooms. We're going to have our mentoring panel, The Mentor and Me, will be located here in this building on the second floor, room 2008. And then lastly, Identity and Aspiration panel, The Exceptional Project, will be in AB1 in the Edison O. Jackson Auditorium. Thank you and enjoy your afternoon panels, and then we will conclude here for the closing reception and closing remarks. Yes.